And because of that matter, being a native Alabamian, this particular issue really motivates me to stand up in terms of the wrongfulness of these type of acts. Because many of people have died and paid the supreme sacrifice for people to have the rights to vote. And in terms of what is taking place here in Georgia is an insult to all of the efforts and accomplishments that we have done throughout this country as people have been disenfranchised, particularly African Americans at the time, Negroes, because I have the historicity, as Maynard said, in terms of being one of the first black city councilmen in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and I was the first black state senator from Tuscaloosa since Reconstruction. And to have people to have this type of indignation of disrespecting the efforts that people have paid the supreme sacrifice to bring about the inclusiveness of people who have been disenfranchised and actually been brought to this country as slaves to have the right to vote, is that Georgia is a state that needs to stand up and let people know in terms of its morality that we're not going to take it anymore. But for the leadership within this state not to say anything, not just one individual who's running for governor to say anything, but those who are fair-mindedness and fair will in terms of the inclusion should make a statement. So I would rest my case in terms of my participation, in terms of talking to you this morning, be ready for questions. But I'm happy to coalesce with the other members of and organizations to bring about a fairness of the process of this so-called democracy. And as I go and get involved throughout this country with getting out the vote, we're going to stand up in Georgia because the historicity of Georgia is not that beautiful. I'm being from Alabama, and I understand we've made some progress. But for Georgia to do what it's doing at this current time is something that we would not allow as a civil rights organization, as Christians. And if you're afraid, whoever you may be, just get out the way and don't say nothing. But silence is the face of evil. And if you don't speak, then you're just as guilty as those who bringing about the discriminatory process. Let me close by saying this. Dr. King said the three ills in society is racism, poverty, and the militaristic aspect of what we do. This is strictly blatant racism. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Steele. Next, we have Dr. Joe Beasley, an international activist who's also the Southern Regional Director of Rainbow Push. Dr. Beasley.
Brother Axel Adams actually is the Southern Director of Rainbow. I'm emeritus. Growing up here in Georgia on a plantation, and after spending our people spending 246 years as slaves, and I entered the U.S. military in 1956 during a time when we couldn't vote. Now here we are in 2018, and this mean person that's sitting in the Secretary of State's office, namely Brian Kemp, that aspires to be the governor of this state, would, with his racist intentions to remove almost 500,000 or more than 500,000 people from the rolls, and also mostly, I said many African Americans, but majority of them. It is damnable. We're not going to accept it. We're not going to take it. We don't care whether, Trump is sitting up in the White House with his reactionary self. We're simply not going back. I came off a plantation in Fed County. We're not going back. Now, this notion that, and I appreciate so much Mr. Palast being able to put up on the screen all the people that have been purged by Kemp, so you can vote, you can go back and re-register. So let me just say again, make it very clear that we're not taking one step back. And at 82, I think I can cover all the damn ground I stand on. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Beasley. Next, we have Attorney Gerald Griggs, who represents the NAACP, a young, dynamic speaker and activist who speaks truth to power. Gerald.
And it's an interesting day that we have to stand here and have a conversation. It's an interesting day we have to sit here and have a conversation about voter suppression in the birthplace of the civil rights movement. So I bring you greetings from the state president, Phyllis Blake, of the state conference of the NAACP, and I also bring you greetings from the city of Atlanta's NAACP and the president, Richard Rose. But I am Attorney Gerald Griggs, the vice president of the state conference of the NAACP, and we have sued Brian Kemp 4 times to get voters' names placed back on the rolls, 4 times for accountability in the most precious of rights, which is the right to free access to the ballot. And we have called for his resignation as Secretary of State to remove the stain of voter suppression from the rolls, to remove the appearance of impropriety with regard to access to November's election. We know that there have been 1.5 million Georgians purged from the rolls, 300,000 African Americans, 30,000 in Fulton County, 28,000 in Clayton County, 40,000 in DeKalb County, and that's just in the metro area. So we are standing together with Mr. Palast to call for free and transparent elections. We are calling on Mr. Kemp to step aside as overseeing this election. We believe it's the right thing to do. We believe 2 Secretaries of States have done it before while they were running for governor. We want to make sure that all Georgians can have trust in this election, can have respect in the outcome, and can move forward. We do not need to go backwards. This is a state where we have always moved forward. We are just a block and a half down from the crypt of the great Martin Luther King on Auburn Avenue, standing in the halls that he built. And we are calling on Georgians. We are calling on our elected officials to do the right thing, to make sure every Georgian that is eligible to vote has the right to exercise their franchise. But not only are we calling for it, we will join in any lawsuit. We will go to any protest. We will interrupt any town hall in a peaceful, nonviolent method to make sure that our voice is clear. And that is, we will not take one step back. We will not lose the franchise, and we will not allow any politician to remove the access of the people to their power. So I'm here as a representative of the Georgia NAACP, just like we were down in Randolph County, making sure that not one poll is closed, just like we will be in all 159 counties getting the vote out. But more importantly, we're going to make sure that our rights are protected. Thank you.
Thank you. That's Gerald Griggs, attorney, and as you can tell, very articulate and serious. Now the star of the show, if you will, the man who's bringing the lawsuit, the man who's has the numbers and the figures. I've been a journalist for more than 40 years. To me, this guy is the truth and the light in terms of investigative journalism. Let me introduce you to Greg Palast.
Thank you. Thank you, Maynard. Thank you, Maynard. And I'll wait.
Let me go. Excuse me, please.
Okay, my name is Greg Palast. I am a journalist. I began investigating Brian Kemp and his questionable racially biased purges of voters beginning in 2014. I wrote up an article and an expose of Mr. Kemp and his cronies in other states and his actions, which have been directed by Chris Kobach of Kansas. I'll explain all this for Rolling Stone magazine.
Can you pause for a second? Can you move over?
Oh, sorry. Okay, I'll start. Let me get that because here's where all the mics are. Okay, once again, my name is Greg Palast, and I'm here purely as a journalist. I have no involvement in any campaigns one way or the other, but I have been investigating Brian Kemp for first Al Jazeera, then Rolling Stone magazine, and now, by the way, I should mention, and you may all be on it, you may know The Rock, Dwayne Johnson and we are filming for BET television. Why am I suing Brian Kemp, and why are these other gentlemen joining me? It is for information. In my request for Rolling Stone magazine, Brian Kemp stonewalled me on information. I was able to get information out of his office that he didn't want me to get, but it's not enough. And now Brian Kemp has released to me, after a threat of a federal lawsuit, he was sent a formal 90-day notice. On the 89th day, he produced a lot of information, including the names of those he has purged, supposedly because they have moved. Over 500,000 names. But that's not enough. We need all the information about how and why he purged them. And I also need to get from him the lists that he received from Chris Kobach of Kansas, targeting hundreds of thousands of Georgians with false information they had left the state. And it is on this basis that people have been removed from the voter rolls. I would ask you, by the way, to let people know that if they go to gregpalast.com, any Georgian and every Georgian, because 1 in 10 Georgians have been removed from the voter rolls by Brian Kemp in 2017 alone. No notice given to any of these voters. No notice that they were purged, and they should check or re-register if they have to. But if you go to gregpalast.com, put in your first, last name, and zip code, you'll find out if you've been removed. You'll find out if you've been removed as a voter. Please re-register, Georgians. Now, this is part of a wide investigation, following up on the Rolling Stone investigation that I'm continuing, now BET and others. I'm an investigative reporter, and we are bringing suits, if necessary, in 26 states if we continue to get stonewalled, and we'll explain that in a minute. How do I know that there are people on the purge list who should not have been purged? We took a sample of 200 to start with, and you'll see a sheet. You have some sheets. I'm sorry we don't have nice posters for you, but there's a limited budget and time here. And this is Georgia voters canceled, not moved. These are people who are supposed to have moved. You know, if you're inactive, by the way, this U.S. Supreme Court said if you're a so-called inactive voter, you can't be removed for not voting. You have a right in America not to vote. You have a right in America to vote. But you cannot be removed if there is evidence that you've never moved, that you're still in your original congressional district or still in the state of Georgia. So here's what we have found. That, for example, here's just an example. A Susan Teague Scott of Atlanta, she was removed as a voter. We found out it's because her name was on a list provided by Chris Kobach of Kansas, given to Brian Kemp. She was matched with the Susan Wilson Scott of Arizona. And therefore, that was used as evidence that she moved to Arizona. Now, how does this happen? And again, you go down this list. Andrew A. Smith. Now, Andrew Smith is a very common name. Andrew Smith. And what Brian Kemp did is he took a list of names provided again by Chris Kobach of Kansas, called the Interstate Crosscheck List, where your Secretary of State in Georgia sent the entire voter files of Georgia in the years 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17 to Chris Kobach of Kansas. By the way, he denied sending these lists to Chris Kobach of Kansas in Washington when there was a big hoo-ha here. So reported the AJC. Check your facts. He sent the entire voter file of the state of Georgia to Chris Kobach of Kansas, despite saying he didn't, but he sent it to him in Topeka, Kansas, as part of the Interstate Crosscheck Program. And how does this program work? All right? How could this have happened? Once Brian Kemp and 26 other states, almost all of them GOP controlled, sent their voter rolls to Chris Kobach of Kansas. Kobach then mushed all these voter rolls together and looked to see if what he said were people voting in 2 states or registered in 2 states in the same election. That's illegal. If you're looking for illegal voters, fine. That's not what they were doing. I brought Brian Kemp's list to Mr. Kobach. He wasn't happy to see me. I had to kind of jump him, to be very honest. Mr. Kobach did say, oh, yes, that's our list. He said, but that's a list that we sent to Kemp and these other secretaries of state saying these people have moved to other states. And I showed Mr. Kobach the list. By the way, I'm trying to show these to Mr. Kemp, who's been hiding from me now for 5 years. 5 years. Okay? And I want to show him these things that he's done. I want to ask him why he thinks Andrew A. Smith moved to Arizona because there's an Andrew Smith in Arizona whose middle name is James. Now, what Mr. Kemp does not know, he tried to deny me the cross-check list, but someone in his office gave it to me anyway. The 500,000 Georgians designated by Chris Kobach supposedly is having moved from the state of Georgia. These are the people on the list. And here's a sample of the Georgia-Virginia cross-check list. This is it. This is what Chris Kobach gave Brian Kemp. This is what is the basis for removing thousands and thousands of Georgians from the voter rolls. Let me give you an example. You just read down this list. I took the name Jones. And just so you know, I did not edit this list at all. This is an actual screenshot. We have about 20 people. For example, Robert Jones. Robert Jones. You think that's a common name? Robert Jones of Atlanta. And let's see, it's Robert Bruce Jones of Atlanta. It's supposed to be, of Jasper, Georgia. It's supposed to be the same as Robert Lindsey Jones Jr. of Virginia. Now, if you look at this list, and again, I didn't edit down this list, there's about 25 names. Not a single one has a matched middle name. Or junior and senior are considered the same voter. On the list were over 300 James Browns, almost none with the same middle name. And James Brown Jr. is supposed to be the same voter as James Brown Sr. Now, you might laugh at this, but it's not a joke. Now, how did I just want to let you know that I've heard now, because some reporters have called Mr. Kemp. He says a couple things. We don't use Chris Kobach's cross-check list to maintain the voter lists. Number one, I love half-truths, but I'll give you the other half. The half-truth is that, yes, this year, because the heat's been on, Brian Kemp did not use the Kansas cross-check list in 2018. But that doesn't affect all these thousands and thousands of voters who were removed in 17. The other is that he denied that he even gave or participated in the cross-check program. He wanted to, but apparently, I don't know what the reason was, but he said they decided not to participate in the program. I'm sorry, from his own office, someone in his own office, they gave us the list. This is from Brian Kemp's office, these matches, these so-called matches. It's from Brian Kemp's own office, all these Joneses with mismatched middle names. Also, I confirmed it with Chris Kobach of Kansas, who has talked to me quite a bit. He's very proud of Georgia's participation that Kemp says doesn't happen. Okay? Now, once again, the cross-check list, here's what happens. Not everyone on the cross-check list loses their vote. That's the other half of the story when they say, we don't use Kansas cross-check, this utterly discredited list of so-called voters who are registered in a second state. I say discredited, go to the New York Times, go to others. You don't have to rely on Greg Palast and Rolling Stone. Utterly discredited. Yes, and I'm going to save time for questions here. Don't worry, but I want to make sure you have the whole thing. All right? Here's the other half of that, because I know you're going to call Kemp. So he says, oh, Palast is crazy. We don't use cross-check. Yeah, here's the deal. No, the way it works is, if you are on the cross-check list, and by the way, you also have from Kansas the participation of Georgia. It's on the Kansas website. Now it's been taken down after I drew people's attention to it. Here's what happens. You're on a list. For example, we have the 2013 cross-check list provided by Chris Kobach. And, remember, Chris Kobach is the guy that Donald Trump appointed to head his so-called voter fraud commission, which imploded on its own lies. But Georgia's using this to remove thousands of voters. Okay, so what happens is if you're on the cross-check list, you get a postcard. Now, it looks like this. It's folded over. You get a postcard. It looks like junk mail. We know from the experience of Ohio, about 80% of the people who get this card throw it away. Now, if you throw it away, the state uses that as evidence you have moved. Now, again, you do not get removed because you're on the cross-check list. First, you get a postcard. You don't respond to the postcard saying, yeah, this is my address, my voting address. Now you're put on the inactive list. You aren't inactive. You were just cross-checked by Chris Kobach, okay, and Brian Kemp. You aren't inactive. Now, you then become inactive. You miss 2 elections. You miss 2 elections, and boom, you're removed from the Georgia voter rolls. Now, again, I want to tell you, now there is a bunch of people who are removed as inactive, but first they miss 2 elections. They get the postcard, they throw it away, or they're not there. They miss 2 more elections. They've missed 4 elections. They get canceled. We can argue about whether that's intelligent or not. I don't believe sending people a postcard, especially if it goes through. Our experts say if a postcard goes through, it means you're there, not that you're not there. But we can argue about that. The most inactive people have missed 4 elections. But if you're on the cross-check list, you just get that postcard and 2 elections and no further notice. So that's why I say go to gregpalast.com, because if you were purged in 2017, you voted in 16, or you skipped voting in 16, you will lose your right to vote. Okay, and I'll take some questions from you.
We have one other speaker. One other speaker.
Oh, right ahead.
One other. This is Insay Ufat, who's the pioneering and progressive leader of the New Georgia Project, who here and has a visionary voice for voter registration in Georgia.
Thank you.
What's that name again, sir?
My name is Nsé Ufot, N-S-E, last name Ufot, U-F-O-T. You're welcome. I'll be brief. So just a couple of remarks. One, November is coming. The Secretary of State is the chief elections officer in the state of Georgia. And Georgians have an opportunity to choose a chief elections officer who understands the vulnerabilities in Georgia's election system and who sees it as their responsibility to expand access, to remove barriers, and to make it easier for Georgians to vote, not more difficult. That's not what we have right now. So between cross-check systems and Georgia's long and recent history of voter suppression, we do not have leadership in the office of Secretary of State that is committed to making it easier for Georgians to vote, and that's a problem. And I'm excited to join fellow Georgians this November to do something about that. The second thing is that Georgia is changing, and the changes that are happening in Georgia are rapid, and they are massive, and they are unique. 1.5 million people have moved to the state in the past decade. Over 80% of them are people of color. Political scientists and demographers are referring to it as the reversal of the Great Migration. So while the New Georgia Project, along with our partners and allies like the NAACP and the SCLC, have registered over 300,000 people of color, 1.3 million people have been purged from the voter rolls, and we believe that many of them are eligible to vote. And so as quickly as we are adding people to the voter rolls, between cross-check and aggressive purges and the delays in processing voter registration forms, people are being denied access to the ballot, being denied access to the franchise, and something absolutely has to be done about it. We don't believe in rewarding failure, and so we believe that these elections that are coming up in November are way too important to have a Secretary of State who's distracted and seeking higher office. That Georgians deserve to believe that their vote matters, and that if they meet the requirements of eligibility, that they won't be artificially kicked off, and that additional barriers won't be constructed to prevent them from participating in Georgia's elections. I will say that we know that with Georgia's exact match system, in addition to cross-check, that African Americans and Latinos are disproportionately impacted and disproportionately prevented from participating, and it is racist, and we absolutely must do something about it. I am looking forward to the multiracial, multi-ethnic Georgia that we are headed towards, and I'm looking forward to working with community organizations and elected officials who understand the priorities of our communities, who share our values, and who will be accountable to all Georgians, not just a few of the elite. Thank you.
Okay. And I just do want to make a very important point, because we are here to announce a federal lawsuit. It is, and we have on the phone available two people for any people afterwards. Jeannie Meyer, who is the chief attorney for all the states of New York of the firm Meyer, Mizaki, Julian. We also have Mark Sweetland, who is legendary in the area of databases and junk mail, who has been going through this list. And we have arranged, by the way, I'd like to announce we've arranged for a contractor who works directly with the post office to go through every one of the 500,000 names and try to identify and somehow get a hold of all those people illegally, wrongly removed by Brian Kemp simply because they were on this crazy cross-check list. And I should say that we did a careful analysis at Rolling Stone of the cross-check list provided by Mr. Kemp. The entire list, we didn't select. It is violently racially biased. We are suing under the National Voter Registration Act, not to reverse his actions. That's up to the activists here. I don't do that. I'm a journalist. My total purpose is to get information, just to get information. That's all out of Mr. Kemp's office as required by the National Voter Registration Act. Questions?
So that is the basis of your lawsuit, Mr. Palast, is just for information, and that's what you're seeking in the federal indictment that
right.
you're
Yes,
Mr. Griggs, hold on, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
If Mr. Griggs, would you be interested in joining that lawsuit since you've already sued for previous times?
Yes, I mean, we're always interested in more transparency, and we will definitely join in that lawsuit. And if we find any improprieties, which we believe we will, then we will sue Brian Kemp again or his successor. So we are about making sure that Georgians have access to the franchise, and it is not biased in any way.
Yes, so in other words, the suit that I have filed and joined by others, my suit under the National Voter Registration Act of 1993, is to get out the information that Brian Kemp has refused to give me. I've brought these notices of federal action in 26 states, many, Oklahoma, Michigan. These are GOP secretaries of states who are turning over their files. Kemp is stonewalling me, giving me almost nothing more than his voter rolls, the Purged List. He stonewalled, would not give me the cross-check list, but I got it anyway, Brian, for the key year. I want the rest of this information. It's the law. You've got to open up your files to know if you've taken people wrongly off the list. And we know you have. We've got their names.
One of the things I hope you've seen is that a continuum. You have Dr. Steele, who's continuing Dr. King's work, and you have Nsé Ufot, who's the New Georgia Project. The effort is still the same. The issue is still the same. New people, old people, still doing the same work. Are there any questions for those folks?
Mr. Palast, are
Yes.
you planning to file the lawsuit today? Do you have a timeline for when you plan to file it?
We've sent, you'll see, we've left copies of the letter from our law firm telling Mr. Kemp, again, you have now passed your 90-day legal limit, and you're still stonewalling us on some of the information. We'll give you one more chance. He has a couple more days. That's it. But we are making the list. The reason why we're making the list of purges available right now is so that people can register. This is the last week to re-register if you're off the list. But we figure within 1 week, we'll actually file the lawsuit in federal court.
Can you explain the evidence that you have that the cross-check list is being used to remove voters from the rolls?
The evidence is that Brian Kemp's office gave us the cross-check list, told us that they were using the list, explained how they were using the list, and we've got the list. That came from, I want to tell you, that came from Brian Kemp's office. Brian Kemp himself refused it, but we got people inside who turned it over to us. In addition, we see the names from the cross-check list. By the way, we're doing very careful work on that. We've seen the names from the cross-check list appear on the purge list, and we have checked, and these people still live here. We took 200 names, for example, found out that 20% of the people on that list still lived here in Georgia. Again, we're using now the contractor from the post office itself and using other means of verification. These are the top experts in the nation on where people live, okay? And they're saying, you got, from the numbers we're looking at, we got thousands and thousands. In fact, we'll have an exact list, an exact number, we hope in days. But we can't wait to get this list out to Georgians. We know, we're looking at a 20% failure rate on this, where people are still living here. That's on those who are also on the cross-check and had those mismatched middle names. That's about 25% of the cross-check list here.
And who was it in the Secretary
I
of
got
State's
another
office
question,
that
another
made
question.
that
Go ahead. I'll get back to you, sorry.
So basically, your premise is that more than 500,000 names on this voter purge list came in some way, shape, or form from the cross-check list.
No, about we've counted exactly. There are 108,000 people on the 500,000 names on the list which came from cross-check, where they originally got a postcard, not because they missed elections, but because they're on the cross-check list. Again, you're not removed because you're on the cross-check list. You get a postcard, you throw it away. Most people do. You skip a couple elections, then you get removed without any further notice. So it's 108,000. We do have information that 2,000 of those people, in fact, did leave to other states, leaving suspicious numbers upward of 100,000.
How do you respond to the Secretary of State's office saying that cross-check data has never been used, neither for list maintenance nor for the no-contact process?
Let's see. I'm trying to use language I can use on television. Brian Kemp's office is not telling the truth, okay? Because it's one thing that Brian Kemp will say to a reporter, and it's not under oath. So we're going to put him under oath because his office says otherwise. Remember, the documentation we're showing you came from Brian Kemp's office. The card sent out, again, the game he's playing with words is that cross-check alone is not enough to remove you from the voter rolls. We know that. He sends out a postcard, you skip 2 elections. So basically he's saying you are an inactive voter. He's using, according to Chris Kobach, who also explained to me how Brian Kemp was using the list, and he's the Secretary of State of Kansas. He's also running for governor, who's running this program for Kemp and other states. And he says what they're doing is they're using this as evidence someone has moved to another state. By the way, that is legitimate. There is another program called ERIC where you can use evidence someone's moved to another state as a reason to send them a postcard and begin the process of removing someone from a voter roll. But the other is legitimate. This is ridiculous. First and last names. That leads to great bias. 85 of the 100 most common last names in America are minority names. There's a question.
That's good. Let me say one thing because I'm going to have to leave. Stay right here with me.
Okay.
This man has done a great job. And we appreciate you. I want you to know that coming from SCLC as president. Number 2, and sometimes we just skate over, miss over, intentionally or not intentionally. 2013, the U.S. Supreme Court rescinded Section 4 and Section 5 of the 1965 Voter Rights Act. That's number 1. When that happened, there are many people like what's going on with the leadership with Mr. Kemp and others throughout this country think they have legal rights and legal participation to eradicate and remove people of ethnicity that they don't want to be a part of the process. This in its own right, and we're missing a lot of the problems, but he has the facts. But the problem is this country has gone back 50 years in terms of racism. And many people don't want to talk about it. They're afraid to talk about it. We have the facts. It's an attack upon those of color, and it's attacked upon poor people. They don't want poor people to be a part of the process. Dr. King said this country is too rich to have any poverty within it. And he also said the government is the enemy. This is a clear example of what the government is doing. It is not friendly to people of color and to poor folks. I'm not afraid to say it.
Come on.
So you can talk the numbers, that's fine. We got the facts. But like Greg said, he's not the activist. He's not SCLC. We fought and died for the right to vote.
That's right.
This country is corrupt.
Right.
It's corrupt, and it's not for our people.
Right.
And it comes right down to Georgia and every other state. But we're too relaxed and too afraid to tell the truth.
Yeah.
I'm not going to sit here and politic and bring about a cake and say, let's have some ice cream and everything is all right, and then give you a popsicle. We're talking about the realness of racism.
Yeah.
That's right.
And it's in this country. And it's in this state. And it's in the leadership. And it doesn't matter who the president or who the governor is. It is embedded in the system.
Yeah.
Your hands are tied. I don't care what color you are. So I'm not here to fool around and say who said this and who said that. Where you get the fact, what, cross-check this. It's racism.
Yeah. Amen.
And you all are not telling the truth if you don't say it on the 6 o'clock news. Racism is being exemplified in its purest in terms of this act. And I have to leave now because I do have to be on another radio station. Yes?
And to the people who haven't been following this closely, that are sitting at home, that may be a little more skeptical and, just trying to, as you put it, ignore it, how do you tie together for them that this is racially motivated and not just...
It's not a rocket, thank you.
30,000 African Americans have
Step to the
been
mic, please.
30,000 African Americans who are otherwise eligible to vote have been removed. We've had to sue Brian Kemp 4 times in federal court.
That's right.
To get those individuals back on the roll. So if you want to say it's not about race, why 300,000, get my numbers, 300,000 African Americans have been removed. 1.5 million Georgians have been removed. We have a systemic issue that has to be corrected for access to the ballot. It's clear as day. Mr. Palast has the facts. Of course, we have the law. We have the activism, the activists that will address this issue. So that's why it's a racial issue. Next question in the back.
If race is the criteria on which they're using to remove people from the voting roll, what would happen if you took race out of the election registration?
What would happen if we took race out of election registration?
I see what you're saying. Let me try.
Okay.
Don't go nowhere, Greg. We got a 1-2.
Okay, yeah.
So Mr. Palast is saying that Andrew Jones
Yes.
equals a black person.
I got you. Let me try to attempt.
What if you took race out of voter registration? Would that weaken their ability to remove?
I understand what you're saying. We don't want race to be taken out. We're proud of who we are. We don't want that to be. We're not, in a position where we're saying that we don't want to be identified as African Americans or Hispanic or people of color, even Caucasian. We're saying the template should be we all must work together for what's right. Fairness. You can eliminate color all you want to, but if it's not a change of heart, and you can't legislate that, if you don't have fairness within the process, you can always, it might not be race, well, I don't like the shoes you have on. Hello, somebody. I don't like the tie you wear. Don't remove the ethnicity of people from the category in terms of registration.
We have a question.
So here's my response.
I must leave.
Yeah.
Thank you.
My issue is this.
Okay.
Why are we removing people from the roll? Period. Let them self-remove themselves. You can have birth certificates, death certificates that could accomplish this. Why are we purging the rolls? That's the main issue. And you can identify certain groups of people merely by their last name because of the history of oppression in this country. The Washingtons, the Jacksons, the individuals who were brought here in the Middle Passage who had been given somebody else's last name, and now they're easily identified. So I hear what you're saying. I wish in a better world we could remove that. But we can't. So my issue is let individuals who don't want to participate in the franchise, do not remove them from the rolls. Let's just make sure everybody's registered, and whoever shows up on election day shows up and exercises the franchise.
Do any of these voter suppression schemes reach the level of criminal charges?
At this point, no. That I know of, as far as the NAACP is concerned, in our 4 previous lawsuits, but we are actively investigating, and if we believe so, we will present it to the authorities for prosecution.
Any other questions, sir?
One last question now, come on.
So what information do you have, and what information are you still looking for from Kemp's office? I was a little unclear on that.
Okay, very good. And by the way, we did an analysis at Rolling Stone of the entire Georgia list, and we found that it was very highly biased of the cross-check list, that should not be used. And I would also note that of the 27 states that were using cross-check, and many are stopping, including Georgia starting now, they've stopped now. But those states that were using it, almost all were GOP controlled. So we're talking race, but race really ends up at the ballot box being a partisan issue. And that is why we are concerned. Only half the states of this country, those that are GOP controlled, use cross-check. Why is any state using it? And you asked now specifically, what do we have, what we don't have? They have refused to officially give us the cross-check lists of 15, 16, and 17, which they must. We know from Kansas that those lists were sent, the voter rolls were sent to Kansas, and we know that Kansas sent back the cross-check lists. No games here, Mr. Kemp. Please give us the list you got from Kansas. Second, we want to know exactly who got a postcard, who returned them, and any other documentation regarding why you would use cross-check at all, and other methods. One thing we want to find out, under a Supreme Court ruling of June, the Supreme Court said you could use a postcard and failure to vote, the contact rule of the past 3 years. But remember, you've already missed 2 elections before. Whether a postcard is a good evidence that you've moved from the state. You cannot be removed for not voting. That is in the NVRA of 1993. It has to be evidence you've moved. We're going to find out if sending people postcards is a good way to find out if people have moved. Our evidence is it is not. So while we are looking mainly at those cross-check names, 106,000 people that were identified originally by cross-check, we're looking at the whole list to see how the entire Georgia program is going. We need, Mr. Kemp, the information, the postcards, who got them, who didn't return them, what type of contacts you've made, what efforts you have made. For example, if people have moved out of Georgia, named Jones, why are they paying Georgia taxes? Why don't you send your own lists? Are there any other key? If there's another,
Palast is available for interviews.
Okay. Let me just get this one woman. She's been so patient. I'll take one more.
And I was actually just going to ask if Dr. Steele, you started saying, when I asked how did we know it was racism, you started saying it's not rocket science, and then we, got on.
The fact being,
you could finish your
yes, thank you. I have people like Greg working with me. I have researchers. And African Americans have lost 53% of black wealth in the last 9-10 years. What's our black wealth? Our homes. Due to the fact that we can't have access to capital. We can't have entrepreneurship. 140 million people. 140 million go to work every day. 140 million living from check to check. 50 million people. And they're poor people. Poor people. 50 million people can't afford a $250 emergency, like going to the emergency room. Can't afford it. One lady that I heard of from a good friend of mine was in an accident. Her arm was broken. She said, the last thing I want you to not to take me to the hospital because I don't want them to bill me. I can't pay for it. I'll go home and doctor on myself with my broken arm. That's racism. And it's systemic, as Gerald said, within this system. And we're going to fight it. And you all as reporters have a responsibility to tell the truth about the facts. We can't get loans. I'm a businessman. I own a business in Alabama, as well as being president of SCLC. I cannot get a business loan from a bank, and I have superb credit rating. Why, Charles? Because I'm poor, but not as poor. See, some folks are poor and some are poor. I'm poor. The folks you see around my office are poor. So until we are sensitive,
Yes, we are.
until we are sensitive to the needs of poor people and people who've been left out of the process, who happen to be people of color, and y'all tell the facts that it's discriminatory, it's racism, and Dr. King said you can't depend on the government to do the right thing, because the government is the enemy. Any more questions?
Wait,
Yes. Well, there's been 1.5 million people in general, so you just do the math. And our concern is everybody having access to the franchise. We just want to point out that 300,000 of them, African Americans, were removed. So the NAACP is in the process of making sure we call each and every person that was removed from the rolls, because we have the list as well, and we have been doing that since September to now. We hopefully will get everybody called by October the 9th, which is the last day to register.
Just very quickly, well, two things. Those removed the cross-check list. Just so you know, we had an analysis of every single Georgian on the cross-check list, and we published that in Rolling Stone and on Al Jazeera. It is extremely biased against African Americans and especially against Hispanics and Asian Americans. And because they use an algorithm of just first and last names. I want to emphasize that that's how you get matched with someone from another state. First and last names. When that happens, you're going to catch black people, as I said, the history of slavery. You're going to catch Hispanics, history of the conquest. You're going to get Asian Americans, history of their immigration. These groups are thereby targeted. The last thing is using a postcard, a 1950s technology. The chance that a white, older suburban homeowner returns a postcard, according to the census, is about 600% higher than a young renter of color in the inner city. You just send out 2 government postcards, you're going to get more white people returning those cards. It's just that simple. So that the process of designation, the process of using postcards, no email, no notices on the press, nothing. You better re-register, check your registration. None of that. So that's the bias in it. I'm going to say one last thing, and then I'm going to break it up so you can talk to me directly for technical information or any of the other people about the actions taken, or you can speak to the lawyers or the experts by phone. But I want to say, as a public service, whether you buy what we're saying or not, as a public service, please tell people, go to gregpalast.com. That's GREGPALAST. Go to gregpalast.com, put in your first name, your last name, your zip code. We'll send back to you your home address to confirm that you are on Brian Kemp's Purged List. We just put it out last night. We're already getting all kinds of people from all over sending us, my name has been removed. Hispanics, by the way, tend to be the people calling in and or sending notes in. So please, just a public service, whether you agree with us or not, please look up and see whether you've been purged from the voter rolls of Georgia, and you have 1 week to re-register.
Thank you very much. We appreciate you. Again, Nsé Ufot, Joe Beasley, Gerald Griggs, and of course Mr. Palast are available for an interview.
Yes, sir. Your name?